I'd like to welcome everyone for joining us today. I will go ahead and get started in just a moment here. So for those of you who are getting comfortable in your chairs and ready to deep dive in with us on what we're going to talk about today, our webinar is going to touch base on key topics or areas of things to consider within your business for setting up a successful second half of the year. I'd like to introduce both of us today. I am one of your hosts. My name is Ashley Haskins. I am currently the Senior Operations Manager at BillMax. And I have my colleague, Megan Linden, who's the Director of Operations over at CR BillMax, and we'll be talking to you today on the content. Megan, you want to say hello to the audience today?
Hello, everybody. Glad to have some of you back. And for those of you who are new, welcome.
Yep, we're going to go ahead and see some familiar faces, hopefully on our webinar series, who are joining our bandwagon. For those of you who are new, welcome to the group. Just kind of going through the agenda, touching base on the mid-year touch points and how to set ourselves up for the second half. We're going to cover topics like the verifications of benefits process, authorizations or reauthorizations, how to use CentralReach to automate some of your processes, and then some closing arguments in the piece. So I'm going to go ahead and let my colleague Megan here take over on the next topic here and kind of introduce some general pieces.
Sure. Thanks, Ashley. So just to start off, for those of you who may not have joined us for some of our previous webinars, just a couple of topics and as far as terms, so you understand what we're talking about. Verification of benefits, that is client eligibility that can be used interchangeably with verification of benefits, insurance verification, or VOB. So if you hear us say any of those terms throughout the presentation, they all relate to the same thing. It's just based off of the client or patient eligibility. Authorization. An authorization is a payer approval to provide services under very specified codes based off of that client's very specific benefits. So those are two main terms you'll hear us review throughout the entire webinar process. So just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with these terms moving forward. So we're at the middle of the year, right? What can we do to continue our success throughout the second half of the year? We've gone over in previous webinars what you do at the start of the year. Well, how do we continue that success moving on through the second half of the year? So best practice is to do a re-verification of your benefits middle of the year. We want to do this because you want to make sure that nothing has changed that could halt your revenue for those specific clients. The first thing you want to do is you want to review the benefits you obtained at the start of the year. Touch base with that family to confirm that there isn't any changes in their policy. Did somebody change a job? Did policies change? Did somebody go through open enrollment? Before they used to have Aetna, now they have Blue Cross Blue Shield, even down to the little minute details as, yeah, I've always had Aetna, but this year I decided to go with the PPO versus an HMO. Can change what that verification of benefits looks like. And if you're not touching base mid-year with your families to make sure that there's changes, you could miss out on information that could relay down the line to claim denials. The step 2 you want to look at is contact the benefits department via phone call based on the phone number that's on the back of the insurance card. You want to confirm that you're speaking with its department for the type of services you are trying to render. For example, if you're calling to get benefits based off of ABA services, you don't want to be talking to the medical department. You want to be talking with the department that's going to give you ABA benefits. Same thing goes if you're going to be calling about speech, PT. You don't want to be calling a department that's going to give you mental health or behavior benefits. You're going to get incorrect information. During this call, you want to make sure that you confirm the plan name, the primary policyholder name, the start date of the policy, deductible amounts, co-pays, co-insurances, any out-of-pocket expenses that might arise for that plan type. Being the middle of the year, you want to check during this verification of benefits to make sure how much of that has actually been met to date. That includes what has been met towards their deductible, what has been met towards their out-of-pocket costs. Are they covered at 100% after their out-of-pocket costs have been met? Is there any exclusions that may come into play? Because this is going to directly relate to your claims processing. If they've met their out-of-pocket as of date of service May 1st, for example, but you have claims processing in June that are applying a client responsibility, those claims aren't processing correctly. You now have to go back to the organization or the payer and say, hey, you're processing these claims incorrectly. Per my mid-year verification of benefits, they met their out-of-pocket costs on May 1st, and they're now covered at 100%. You should not be applying any client responsibility for any claims moving forward. This also allows you to make sure that you're not invoicing families or clients for out-of-pocket costs that they don't have, incorrect information. So making sure that when you're doing this mid-year verification, you're getting those little details to make sure that your claims are processing correctly and that families are not getting invoices or statements that are not related to payments that they actually need to make. You also want to make sure during this time frame, again, that you are confirming specific codes that are covered. Again, confirm the plan type. At the start of the year, they might have had a PPO. They might have changed that to an HMO due to cost. They might have gone the reverse. They had an HMO, now they have a PPO. You want to also, again, confirm the diagnosis codes are covered under the specified codes you plan to render services under. Again, confirm if there's an authorization required for those specified codes. Confirm any exclusions around any service codes, place of service, diagnoses. And again, you want to make sure that you're confirming maximum allowable visits. We know that most clients who are obtaining ABA services, they're getting a large volume of them. If they have a maximum allow, either it's visit dollar-wise, this mid-year mark is going to determine how much more services you could provide, whether it's a number of visits. Same thing goes for speech, OT, PT. They have visit limitations. If they have visit limitations, the middle of the year, you might have already exceeded those. So what's your next step in making sure that that client can continue to get services if they do have an exclusion? Again, you want to make sure that you're confirming any age restrictions, limitations for the policy, places of service. If telehealth is still available, we do know that based off of recent turns in healthcare policies, a lot of organizations and payers that used to allow for telehealth services are starting to pull back on that. Now that you're mid-year, did you include that in your treatment plan? Telehealth services, are they no longer covered after a certain date? You want to make sure that all of those pieces are put into place so that you don't have claim denials that are found out after the fact, which in further delays your payment and your revenue. Again, you want to make sure if it's a plan year, which means it starts at a middle of the year, meaning that their policy might start in March versus a calendar year where their policy starts in January. Those are going to adjust your out-of-pocket cost, your out-of-pocket maximums, and when they restart. Confirm the mailing address, the fax number for the payer, the clearinghouse ID number. Make sure that all of that is still up to date. And as always, make sure that you're getting the name and the last initial of the person you spoke with, as well as a reference number for the call, and documenting that in the system. So if you're updating this information in the middle of the year, it's going to help track your revenue and ensure claims are not being incorrectly applied to client out-of-pocket costs, as well as making sure that you know when you should be getting paid at 100% of your agreed rate and your contracted rate to better assist with understanding revenue. Did you have a dip in revenue at the start of the year because you're having a harder time collecting on client responsibilities, where now you're at the middle of the year, it's coming straight from the insurance carrier? So you're going to need more hands on deck arguing insurance carriers versus sending out invoices. All of this is going to make sure that you continue to have success for the second half of the year. What are some tips to help you mid-year of your verification process? Ashley and I talk all the time regarding making sure that you have a process for triggering everything in your workflows. This time you want to have a process that's going to trigger your re-verification of benefits and any of its affiliated workflows. So if you did a re-verification of benefits and you're at that middle of the year mark and you know that you got your authorization at the start of the year, it's a 6-month off. You're doing a re-verification, you're probably going to need to reauthorize. Make sure that those steps are being triggered by proper workflows to make sure everything is followed through it. Major tip that we could go over is verify if maximum benefits have been met for the year. You do not want to send families incorrect invoices because that just makes everybody upset. So if you verify the benefits in the middle of the year, you can confirm whether or not that client or that family has continued out-of-pocket expenses or if they've been met for the year. You also want to verify with the clients that there has not been any changes in the insurance since the start of the year. Again, life happens. Loss of a job, brand new job, new changes in policies, updates in open enrollment, anything like that can change at any time of the year. Keeping that line of communication open with your families is going to allow you to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information for everything regarding that client's benefits. You also want to make sure that you're re-verifying benefits for all active plans on the client. That means if they have a primary, if they have a secondary, if they have a tertiary, if they have grants, make sure all of that is re-verified. We do know that in some states, Medicaid changes based off of your eligibility or your finances. You might have Medicaid this month, next month you might not. You might not have been eligible for Medicaid, and this month you are. You want to make sure that any policy that you have listed that the family is telling you is active is re-verified at the middle of the year. And also remember that some insurance cards don't have the behavioral health contact numbers on the back of the card. You want to make sure that you are verifying that you have the correct contact information via payer portals to make sure that you are calling and getting the right information. Another piece you want to remember when you're doing this re-verification in the middle of the year is the birthday rule. The birthday rule should be applied and considered whenever there is more than one commercial policy. If families went from only having one policy to now having two, that might change their coordination of benefits, which is going to change your authorization, which is going to change your claims. Making sure that this information is up to date every year and then every mid-year is going to set you up for success for the rest of the year.
That's a lot of information just from the verification side, Megan. So I want to kind of take a lot of that and take a step in. I know the audience here probably heard a laundry list of things that we should consider in just what it takes to intake a client, questions that we ask at the beginning of the year. We're now saying we're doubling that effort at the mid of the year. But let's not forget that these things all tie into billable services, as you were saying earlier. This is what we're trying to avoid: any kind of complication, hurdle, latency, corrected claims, billing claims to different payers. We're trying to prevent all of that hiccup to not make as much of a wrinkle in the middle of the year financially for your organization. And we're going to kind of close that in with how that ties to the authorization. So what do we look for when we're doing the mid-year authorization step? What we should be really looking for is, do we need to reauthorize? We say that because most payers have a 6-month time frame, or usually 1 year. They pretty much will fit into one of two categories. So are you using a mechanism to track and identify authorizations that are expiring? Maybe you're saying to yourself, well, shoot, I don't have 6 months or 1 year. I have to reauthorize every 7 or 8. Maybe you have something unique in your market. What's important here is to find a process, find a system to organize yourself and your organization's authorization, so you give yourself ample time to look at those requests, what's coming in. What I'm trying to kind of allude here is that every payer is going to have a unique qualifier that makes that criteria different. I would love to say there's a bucket where every client falls into the same standard, same criteria, same process. Wouldn't that just make our life so much better if they all follow the same song? The reality is they don't. Most of the payers follow their own cadence. So finding a mechanism to track when Blue Cross Blue Shield reauthorizes, how long does that process take when I submit it to authorization for Blue Cross Blue Shield versus my process with Cigna or Aetna, and so on and so forth. So identifying that is the first step. We want to make sure that you really understand the process here too. So looking at prior authorizations, maybe history that you've learned over time, talk to your teammates who've been responsible for this. What kind of things did they see? What kind of patterns? What I mean by that is when you're looking at reauthorizing, did we see a pattern where we asked for 1,000 hours and we only got 500 every time we asked? Did we get told every time we submitted an authorization that we didn't have the right documentation? Could we improve our process to ensure we have that before we ask? Can we improve mechanisms to ensure every step of what is needed is there as a proactive approach versus reactive to kind of slim down the waiting time? Which kind of goes into item number 2. If we've got ourselves organized, what kind of factors should we consider when reviewing the utilization? So before we submit for an authorization again mid-year, we need to ask ourselves, have we been successful with prior authorizations to line us up for what we're continuing to ask? So factors like this go into, am I overutilizing a code? Do I underutilize the service? Why does this happen? Am I scheduling over or under? Am I not using reporting to identify when I need to ask for certain hours or schedule certain hours or prevent overscheduling? Are holidays going to increase or change my next utilization for the second half of the year? We come into the second half of the year, there's significantly more holidays and school closures during this half. So will my utilization change for the back half of the year, where the front half may have been a little bit more rigid because of lack of schedule change with schools or holidays, things like that. So once again, just taking time to look at the process, look at all the details involved, and then ask ourselves, do any of these pieces impact how we used the authorization in the last period? So let's just focus on the 6-month stint. If we're asking for another 6 months in the back half of the year, did I ask for 100 hours? Did I get it? Yes. I got 100 hours. Did I use all 100 hours? I did not. I only scheduled 90. My next question would be, why did I not use the remaining 10 hours? That then kind of will tie into when we reauthorize for the back half of the year, what we might anticipate the payer's behavior to be, because they're going to see on their end what you're asking for and what your pattern has been. You would like to not be blindsided by information if you can predict it coming in. So going into rounding number 3, what are the best practices in utilizing authorizations? Well, obviously it's making sure that we're capitalizing on a schedule front and making sure we're looking for patterns and ways that we can either decrease errors or increase services and maximize the utilization. So every authorization really should be functioned to be designed and scheduled and set out for that period of that authorization period. Most clients are getting repetitious exposure. So if I have a 6-month off, we should be taking that 6-month off and having our clinical team or maybe a scheduler look at that authorization and find out how they can best maximize all 100 hours within that 6-month period from a scheduling standpoint versus scheduling on the fly, maybe week by week or month by month. This way, you can track scheduling with the utilization report within Central Reach to identify, are we set to maximize our utilization? Kind of going back to bullet number 2, when I said underutilizing, this also impacts mid-year authorizations. If we scheduled and hit our target of billing what we requested, submit our treatment plan saying we're hitting targets, clients making progress, and I want to request the same number or maybe increase to work on more complicated targets, then maybe we need to implement more evidence to the payer saying we've hit the 100 hours you gave us. We're asking for now 120 hours because we have these targets. If we underbilled any of that, meaning we didn't use what the payer said we were allowed to get compensated for, they're more likely to deny your increase request because they're not going to grant you permission clinically if they didn't see you hitting targets and meeting the billables that they granted you from the first authorization. So tracking and reporting is super important here. But once again, not forgetting the complication of the back half of the year, summer, holidays. This is a scheduler's nightmare. When we have families who don't tell us, 4 weeks in advance when they know summer ends, if a client's going to be increasing hours or decreasing hours. Does that change our utilization? Does that change our current schedule that we have planned out? So knowing those trends and making sure that they're in line with proper utilization. All right, so tips on the mid-year authorization process. So just like we did for the verification side, it correlates to authorizations. As you heard Megan talk about, developing a process that triggers us to look at these things is where it all starts. If you're telling yourself we don't have a mechanism, we don't have a report, we should really explore how to fill that void. There should be a process that we have internally that allows us to identify guidelines. Do I have a resource document that tells me how my Blue Cross Blue Shield payer behaves when I'm doing ABA? Do I have a resource document that tells me how Cigna behaves? These are all things that should start the first line of defense when we're trying to capitalize on revenue opportunities. That then correlates to understanding the requirements of each payer. So if we're trying to stay ahead of the game, and I mentioned earlier that Blue Cross Blue Shield takes at least 2 weeks to do an authorization once you submit it, because that's their typical processing timeline, then we should account for that before we request an authorization. An authorization shouldn't end on May 31st and we're making a request June 1st. We should be requesting for a June authorization at the beginning of May to make sure we've given the payer ample time to get through their motions, to get through their process, to give us what we need as an organization to allow billable services to be concluded when we need the new authorization to begin. So understanding when you can start that process. I said, check for patterns and utilization of client authorizations. Talk to your team who does this. If you have an individual whose job is to do authorizations and verifications, ask them what they're seeing. See if they can give you any insight to helping us build better tools, or ask colleagues in your area, what kind of trends and patterns do they see? All right, so we're going to kind of go into don't allow for overutilization of authorizations, as that could decrease revenue. We're kind of taking the tone and going from a proactive to let's stay away from reactive behavior. So we don't want to undervalue this next little box here, but really essentially what this is saying is if we don't render a service and we don't maximize the utilization, that does change what continues on for the rest of the pattern of the behavior of what we get going forward for the rest of the year. So if a certain code is overutilized, maybe we need to identify that and ask for additional units. Maybe we do a checkpoint and realize that targets are not getting hit as quickly as possible. So we need to reach out to the authorization department to request for an adjustment of an authorization that currently exists. But we don't want to overutilize. What that means is you don't want to create a timesheet for a service in hopes that the payer is going to pay it. So we need to make sure that our tracking mechanisms are in place. We want to make sure that our authorization has the correct calculation, that we've set our scheduling parameters out in our scheduling modules to account for everything that we're looking at, and make sure that we're taking all of those pieces in place, because there are factors within CentralReach that you can use to trigger alerts or prevent you from making these things in the system or scheduling appointments if it doesn't align with your authorization and the utilization you've set out. I want to go ahead and take a moment before I jump into the next one and talk about just making sure that it is best practice to never render a service if a payer hasn't authorized for the service. I get a lot of feedback as a person in the billing industry that it's really inconsistent from one payer to the next if they will retro authorize what you've requested from the day of when you request the authorization. Will they backdate it to the date of your request on the document versus when you submitted the documents? Or do they authorize it from the day that they physically approved the authorization? So there's 3 potential dates in play here. So, and that potential option means you have 3 ways that this could go sideways. So it's best practice to never render a service until you know from the payer that that has been approved. Otherwise, you may put yourself in a very difficult situation having services rendered that are not going to be compensated and not billable to your client as a result of you not following authorization processes. All right, so then translating that into updating any documents needed for authorization and when they're ready to start the process. I kind of touched base on this very briefly on the slide prior about making sure that we've done everything from a proactive approach. So we want to make sure that documentation is informational and that it aligns with what we know the payer is expecting from us. If we send in documents because we think the payer needs it, sometimes that mucks up the process or creates a latency in the case manager reviewing your authorization request. So you want to kind of avoid any of those things that could slow down the process and making an argument for a denial for our authorization and the back and forth. So aligning our documents, making sure we're submitting exactly what is requested, only what is requested before the process even starts is kind of the best practice. It's kind of aligned with what we call clean claim billing. We don't want to give the payers any reason to kick something back that says we now have to play more of a back and forth game or a latency in getting our results. So the final piece, documentation, authorizations with proper information. Document, document, document. We love this word because it's really the only way to kind of take things further to a next step. So making sure documentation's in a row, making sure that everyone has access to the proper information. You could use this documentation on appeals in the future if we ever needed to. So make sure whenever you get a verification or an authorization, you get the name of the person who's authorized it, a reference number, you ask what codes you're getting approval for, verify the units, the hours, the group, the place of services, everything Megan mentioned in earlier slides. Those are all being double checked. This is your one chance before you go live with billing services to ensure the payer set everything up correctly. So make sure it's documented and somewhere where you can resource this document for a later resource. So rounding up and closing this out, how do we automate this process? So if you're familiar with our software and maybe you're already using some of these tools, this may be comfortable knowledge for you. Otherwise, if you're not, we're going to kind of expose you to how to use CentralReach in some ways that may allow you to start creating workflows within the system. So once again, we talk about utilizing the system to create mechanisms to standardize your processes. As you can see here on the right side of my screen, we've created a format within the tasking module here that allows us to create workflow triggers. Maybe you're using something else, but this is just one mechanism we're talking about within CentralReach to create a workflow by assigning a task template that has certain criteria, which then triggers queues that you can see on the bottom screen that allows maybe a supervisor or a team to work in a queue format to grab tasks, assign, close, and complete. Same thing with the verification process. Maybe you don't have a way of documenting all of the questions you ask in a verifications benefits check within the platform. So we advise here that maybe custom contacts forms is just one mechanism that we are more favorable to helping us document verification benefits, keeping it within the platform, keeping it secure within CentralReach, and asking us the same standard questions that doesn't deviate because somebody's passing around an old copy of a form that has been amended in the last 6 months. But allows us to collect the data in a more HIPAA compliant environment and alleviates the use of paper. And then last but not least, setting up the benefit information pieces in the profile. So here's another area where you can capitalize recording that information within the profile, making sure that you're identifying co-pays, co-insurances. Maybe you're using the overview tab to identify quirkinesses about the payer. Maybe we know that this is medical covered services where a different payer is for ABA specifically. But using this patient responsibility field here to help us identify what we know from a verification standpoint, which makes it faster to invoice patient responsibility, makes it faster to work claims management when you're trying to identify if an EOB's balance is due to patient responsibility. It's just another mechanism to have information in front of you so that you can see it in other relatable screens to work things a little bit more efficiently. All right, so in closing, you heard us talk about a lot of the health that correlates mid-year, that starts at the beginning of the year. So although we've set a good stone and a foundation at the beginning of the year, we didn't want to have it underestimated that it should not be looked at again until about, the next year. That's so far from the truth. Verifications of benefits and authorization is super critical mid part of the year, just to once again do that checks and balances, coming in, resetting our expectations, making sure we're still on the same trajectory that we set out at the beginning of the year, and keeping our business and our success continuing to moving forward all year around. So using these tools and leveraging these resources with maybe your platform expert or the BillMax team, things like that, all can be options that you guys have within your toolbox to kind of see how you can be more efficient or more effective in your day-to-day. So I'm going to touch base here really quickly on the CentralReach function, and I'll let my colleague Megan chime in on the BillMax side. But as you kind of heard me talk about at least 3 tools between the tasking module, custom contact forms, and the payer profile, those are just 3 areas of central reach that allow you to really customize the function of your business and how it relates to the services that you're providing in the autism and IDD community platforms to really help you unlock resources to make your business more efficient, tying into reporting, practice management, clinical resources, all of those deeds that you need to kind of keep visibility from a high level view moving smoothly. Megan, would you like to chime in really quickly here on maybe why BillMax might be able to be a little bit of a resource as well?
Of course. The CR BillMax team has expertise in all of these areas. We understand authorizations, verifications, and how important they are in making sure that your revenue cycle not only stays steady, but is accurate and allows your business to grow. By partnering with CR BillMax, we can help you with the reminders for these types of pieces, as well as best practices to make sure that you are set up for success within the Central Reach platform. So having that partner throughout all of these changes, these start of the year, mid-year, payer changes, all that kind of stuff is just allows us to partner with organizations who want to grow, who don't know where to start, as well as allowing us to show you a better way of making sure that you're running your business and rendering the services to those in need.
Thank you, Megan. So just really quickly, we